Cynthia Davidson is co-founder and executive director of the nonprofit Anyone Corporation and editor of the International Architecture Journal blog, which she launched in 2003. She's also the former Any magazine from 1993 to 2000. She co-curated the Architectural Imagination, an exhibition of speculative projects for Detroit, shown first in the US Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2016. Cynthia teaches at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn and Cornell University's College of Architecture, Art, and Planning in Manhattan. The American Academy of Arts and Letters recognized her work with its Architectural Award in 2014. Cynthia, the floor is all yours.
I come out from behind the mask and it's too bright in here. Is everyone, I have to change my view from speaker to,
I've actually turned it for everyone, for all the viewers, to gallery view. So now everybody will be visible.
Is Alejandro going to hide? Is he there? Is Antoine there? First of all, Chris, it's nice to meet you. You are the only person in this group whom I've never met before, which is actually extraordinary to me. I want to thank Perry and Laura and Michael for insisting that I do this. True confession, I was originally asked to be one of you, and I demurred because there was no way I could stand on the same ground as all of you. I'm an organizer, not a, I don't know, a preparer the way you are. I don't produce in the way any of you do.
I'm taking that with a grain of salt, Cynthia.
Who just said that?
Your intern from 1994.
Oh yeah, the stories I can tell about Thomas Show. Anyway, it's been Perry and Laura and Michael came back to me and said, look, you have to moderate a roundtable with all these people. And I thought, well, there's a challenge. That would really be fun. So I have been sitting here copiously taking notes for these 2 days. And honestly, I don't know where to begin. There are so many things on the table. It's been such a rich couple of days that I thought I might start with laughter. And I was fascinated that, that Teresa just brought up laughter in terms of the city and then referred to Zoom itself as the kind of city we're occupying now, because I think the one place where laughter and humor has been very difficult to share is on Zoom, when everyone is silenced, like you're all supposed to have your mics turned on, like Thomas and Antoine, that when somebody tells a joke, nobody laughs or no one can hear the laughter. And so there is no humor and we are isolated in these cells. One of the things that happened at the beginning of the lockdown is one of my sons thought I might be bored. And so he gave me the gift of masterclass. And I thought, well, I now dutifully have to look at masterclass. What are the offerings? I don't want to take Frank Gehry, whatever, right? So I found David Sedaris, the humor writer. And I thought, well, I've always been interested in humor. This is a good moment to be interested in humor or to think about humor. And so I listened to a couple of David Sedaris sessions. And I thought the best advice he had for people who are interested in writing about humor was to ask better questions. And so it is the advice I am now passing along to my students, where I teach writing, I don't teach architecture. And it's something I'm always challenging myself to do, to ask better questions. So I'm hoping that we can ask each other better questions in this context, and that I might have some questions for you as well to start this off. I was particularly interested in the placement of Alejandro and Francesca's pieces in what I felt was very much the present moment. As as Alejandro and Francesca don't live in the United States, but of course have relationships with the United States, we've had a very bad week here, one could say. And I don't want to be the Chris Wallace of moderators here today, but this whole idea of truth and post-truth that Alejandro raised, and this idea of the curve, and especially these pink curves that Francesca showed, very much resonate with the news we had this week about the man who has been living in the White House. And that is when it was announced that this person has a positive COVID test, where many people, myself included, who didn't think it could be true. That we've come to a point in, is it in society? Is it in politics? Is it contemporary culture? Is it QAnon? Is it conspiracy theory? Is it social media? Where we don't know what is true and what isn't true. Therefore, one can understand why there are a whole lot of people who don't believe the pink curves. So where at one point in time, perhaps when Galton was creating these curves that Francesca talked about, they were more easily adapted, they were more easily assimilated because people didn't know as much or thought they didn't know as much. Whereas today people doubt the accuracy of these pink curves and say, no, it's not happening in my backyard, right? And don't behave accordingly. Is that a legitimate response? Is it not a legitimate response? Against all of this, I guess I would say, is that I started thinking, listening to all of you, is architecture where the truth lies? Oh. If there is an exactitude and a precision in architecture, which we can always question, is there also some truth in it if we're living in this sea of non-truth? And now I've just used the word sea, meaning the ocean, and I found this whole thing an incredible circle of events where Chris started out talking about weather, and a talk which she ended with Phaedrus's discussion of the ship in the sea and the mobile architecture is a ship in the sea. And then we come full circle to Ada and Thomas and the container ship in the sea carrying the unknown. And the cruise ship, as Thomas said, also carrying the unknown, the virus which no one knows how to contend. So where is architecture in this sort of messy milieu? I throw that out as a kind of sort of response, very personal response to everything that I've heard these days. I would like you to talk to each other, and I'm sure you have questions for each other, and that if there are moments of quiet, I have questions for you. But if I am going to be Chris Wallace, and I do have to have questions, I have written questions for all of you. I've done my work, Perry. I tried very hard. And so I wanted to maybe start with Chris, and this is silly, but Chris, how is the weather in South Hadley today? And what is the condition of your house?
So I have no idea what the weather is in South Hadley because it's 11 miles away, and there's a mountain range between me and South Hadley. It's not a large range, but in Massachusetts, it seemed once upon a time like a large range. So it's the Holyoke Range, but I'm in Amherst. So my view is of the Pelham Hills, just like Emily Dickinson's view. It's gorgeous today. It couldn't be more perfect weather. It would be just right to dapple one of your beautiful buildings with clouds, and there's a light wind that will change the shimmering surfaces that enchanted me as I looked at plans of Sunil and Alejandro. So yeah, so that's the weather here. It couldn't be more beautiful. The house I live in is a mid-century modern house. It was born the same year I was in 1954, and I used to think it was a modern house, but of course, no longer being a very modern thing myself. Now it seems like something of a ruin, the way I seem like something of a ruin.
Is it a ruin? How is it weathered?
Oh, it's actually weathered gloriously. It was built by a very young architect, one of his first buildings. He studied with Gropius at Harvard in the early 50s, and he came back and he built a sort of a ship of a house. And people who come to this house will say either in praise or opprobrium that it looks like it was built to be a ship. It has a little bit of case study. It has a little bit of Frank Lloyd Wright, because there's a tiny Usonian house around the corner that was built for an English professor at Amherst, and this house, on which much more money was lavished, was built to outdo Frank Lloyd Wright by a 20-something Harvard graduate.
I mean, this is almost a question that I should ask all of you, but I won't, because I know this is not what our audience wants to hear. And so I'm going to move on to Alejandro, because I'm actually going in a kind of chronological order here, but feel free to interrupt or wave at me because you have a question that you want to ask somebody. And oh God, wait a minute. I don't like these chat things because then I have to stop and read them.
Cynthia, I was just putting it in the chat. You should, if you don't know it, you should look at Mary Beard's History of Laughter.
I don't know it. I will do that. You think that will help me?
Well, I'm just thinking laughter might be precisely the kind of right question to bring to exactitude.
Well, then in following that, instead of Alejandro, I will go straight to Teresa and say, Teresa, what makes you laugh?
Only some comedians, only some. Strangely, a mixture of American, French, and Italian. Maybe because that's the only thing I can understand.
It has to be a comedian that makes you laugh?
Yeah, or within a movie, but yeah.
So you don't just find yourself walking through the city and laughing?
No, no, it needs to be provoked by a joke or some comic scene. No, sorry.
That's very interesting. Well, right above you is Antoine Picon. Hello, Antoine.
Hi, Cynthia.
What makes you laugh?
Very different things. Buster Keaton, for example, or somebody you've probably never heard of, which is Gaston Lagaffe. I think Laure must know it. It's a comic book of one of the most talented Belgian comic designer, and the guy is a complete catastrophe all the time, but it's hilarious. So I don't know, I must have read each album probably 50 times. So, and I still laugh, although I know pretty much what's going to be in the next picture.
Okay, Eric, what makes you laugh?
I mean, I think sometimes our work makes us laugh, you know. When we sort of structure an argument, sort of lay out a series of images, sequencing of images, the punchline, or punchlines in architecture.
So it's interesting. You're all associating laughter with a punchline. Is there laughter out of joy? Do we have to have a punchline? Does architecture really have a punchline, or does architecture ever inject any joy into our lives? I mean, I'm so
Architecture injects joy, but fun almost never.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Architecture, architects actually are pretending they have a sense of humor, but actually they're not fun. It's too serious. They pour tons of concrete, things, etc. So, it's not a light business. So there is not much to do to make it really fun. Even the fun palace is not that fun.
Well,
We call what Eric wrote.
we don't know if it
And
would have
it's
been.
certainly not 28mm columns, even covered with body paint to hide the flying. To me, comedy can be, I find a lot of things that would make me laugh are kind of physical humor, kind of unexpected relationships, out of the blue, working against gravity, kind of the ability for a comedian to kind of defy all kind of relationship of the body to space. So for me, those are kind of ways that, like I'm looking at, Sumo Studio, like the project, and as Sunil was going on and saying, then it was first these slim columns and this light line in the BIM model, and then all of a sudden, the invisible body paint, right? So invisible paint makes me laugh because there's an impossibility of defying that physicality in some way by a cover up. I'm thinking of Mark, the idea of the bubbles and squeaks and, the cover up of all of those errors. That's kind of my feeling.
I also wonder about inside jokes and kind of disciplinary inside jokes. I feel like if you watch Tarantino,
There's nothing less funny than those.
Yeah.
No, but I'm thinking like if you watch
Almost as
Tarantino,
funny as academia.
you see a filmmaker who's sort of constantly talking about the discipline of filmmaking, right? And it's about a kind of dialogue with other films. I think architecture has that too. And I think there's a lot of inside jokes in architecture, maybe not funny to everybody else, but I think we're talking to ourselves, we're talking to our discipline, sometimes we're talking to the public, but oftentimes we're just talking to each other. And so there's a lot of inside jokes, I think, in disciplinarity. I mean, it's sort of built in this idea of who's the audience for this work. And I thought Alicia's sort of comment about the sort of tools and the kind of public, or the kind of expression of making, or making in public, or making public. I thought that was really interesting. When are we talking amongst ourselves as inside jokes, or when are we talking sort of to a broader public?
Yeah.
I mean, within a discourse of adaptive reuse, humor psychoanalytically is supposedly the healthiest adaptive defense against more intolerable emotions. We sublimate fear, shame, aggression into humor, into comedy. So that which is funny is always already a kind of adaptation in real time to conditions. But I love the distinction between joy and fun. It's a fun palace, not a joy palace. I think that's important. And if it isn't a burden, I wonder if I could invite Professor Wigley to remind us about why architects don't smile, or if they do smile, they have to smile a lot, because it's a passage from one of your lectures, Mark, that has always stayed with me, and I still think about and laugh nervously about.
So I try not to smile before talking. Yeah, I mean, I'm with Antoine and in so many ways, and I mean, architects are not funny. You could almost say an architect is a human from whom laughter has been surgically removed. And there may be a relationship between this and the first question that Cynthia asked about sort of post-truth. Like, so if as it were, architects feel the burden of truth, then laughter would not come so easily. And truth sounds like, and is, as it were, religion. So in as much as architects have felt themselves to be a religious calling, then the lack of laughter is a sort of, as it were, a sign of their dedication and meditation to a kind of heroic task, which could be the thousands of tons of concrete being poured, but could be the entire earth, because after all, any architect, if asked to redesign the planet, would do so the following day. In other words, there is no, as it were, a limit to the sort of architect's sense of responsibility. So if it's the case that every young architecture student has to prepare themselves for the possibility of designing the planet Earth, and that does seem to be how we now talk to our students, as if this is now their responsibility. And even to produce a kind of white, I would say, liberal guilt about the general world in which we live. So they not only have to redesign the planet, but all forms of social life that may occur there. This doesn't sound like much fun at all. The point, if I could just steal a moment there to go back again to this question of post-truth, I suppose the big decision, and I was curious about Alejandro's point of view, post-truth could be post one truth, as you were indicating, like that there would be multiple truths, but there could be something that is neither truth, let's say, or as you put it, anything goes. Like there can be some other territory there. And in that territory, it could be that architects will laugh a lot. Charles Moore, by the way, when I did the survey of photographs of architects, because they really, it's not just that they don't laugh, they all appear to be constipated, like as if the entire world was passing through their internal organs. And they, especially so upon receiving the Pritzker Prize. The Pritzker Prize is the quickest way to see the kind of indigestion of the figure of the successful architect. But if it's, so it's not just not smiling, it is really a kind of a pain. By the way, that's why the Jesuit tradition is very strong in architecture. We all know pained architects. And I've forgotten what I was going to say next, but it had to do, I guess, with trying to get Alejandro going on the post-truth thing, because I suppose what I see in the world is not so much post-truth, but a sort of a multiplication of religions. Like religion, you know, we do live here in the United States in the single most religious society in the world, self-declared, self-identified. So we're really in a kind of religious battle. Then the question is, okay, where are architects positioned relative to this? And perhaps at one moment in our shared history, scientists could have positioned themselves as an alternative source of knowledge to religion. Of course, this is a formula that no longer works. And I think Alejandro is sort of trying to find, let's say, what are the strategic options in that moment. As Alejandro knows, I'm going to totally disagree with the formulation that postmodernism is the source of anything goes. Which is an incredibly wonderful compliment to those of us academics, as if we have such authority. I think this idea of postmodernism as anything goes was a neoconservative image produced in reaction to so-called post-structuralist work. It was, I never experienced anybody adopting such a position. So it was actually a kind of portrait used to demonize that discourse. Those people doing the demonizing, they are now the kings and queens of the post-truth empire. So we would tell different stories because mine is self-serving, and Alejandro's, I'm sure yours is absolutely not self-serving. I hand over to you.
I was simply trying to formulate something that has been has been occupying my time lately, and in a way I found a great opportunity to explore it here, and particularly in your abstract when I read the relationship between exactitude and intolerance, because you know, I mean, maybe I will disagree. I could disagree with the fact that that this postmodern world. I do believe that the postmodern attitude of everything, as the text that Dennett that I show from Dennett. Dennett says that has brought us to a situation in which we are simply having conversations and nothing really matters, or we cannot really try to get to any form of truth. So the idea of truth has been expelled from the the intellectual system that in which we have been living for a few decades, and I suspect that that there is something in that tolerance, infinite tolerance that we have created, that that is perhaps responsible for the fact that today, you know, there are people who can say almost anything they want, and nobody can call them to order. And I believe that that with the amount of tools that that we can use today, at least in the field of architecture, which is entirely unprecedented, I think is almost necessary that that we start constructing again a certain approximation to that truth, and that we don't necessarily take any single discourse that that anybody can tell us. So I mean, we should start calling the bullshit out of people.
No, but just to be clear, I suppose, or I love your call for intolerance, because it seems to me, for example, if architects have to declare what they will not tolerate, that seems to be a much sort of more precise question than a kind of general idea that being tolerant is good, right? And I think there's the possibility, learning from Antoine, that maybe we could also be intolerant of the human. Like that could be the first declaration, that we are somehow intolerant. But ultimately, I suspect it's Francesca that has the clue, because in that remarkable history that you show, the tolerance and intolerance, they could never be separated, right? We could never even have this conversation of one versus the other. To be either softy and liberal or tough and intolerant, these are not options, but a kind of biology even, I suppose.
Speak to that, Francesca?
Well, I guess, I mean, I would like to, as I tried to show, unpack and interrogate the construction of truth. I'm talking about truth before post-truth, and interrogate the construction of statistical truth and this kind of, the way in which it very cleverly sets up a kind of exactitude of the inexact. Now, all of that just feels like a mad luxury. How can we possibly afford to even go down that path, given you don't believe Trump has COVID, you know, given post-truth? So, you know, it's like, you know, I want to do that, but it's actually, there's a shitstorm out there of just, that almost requires a new enlightenment to just try and faire des précisions, correct the, you know, the path in some radical way. And I think a call for, I mean, Alejandro, I'm sorry, I was asleep. I missed your lecture. God knows what time it is. But I will watch it at some point. Oh, I couldn't hear you. You're muted or something, or there's a Zoom curation going on by the AI. But I think a kind of a call for intolerance sounds like a healthy tonic, but it should also be not a reversion to the kind of constructions of truth that reigned before, because the way in which the exactitude of the inexact that statistic constructs just completely sets the ground for the ascendancy of an abuse of big data is, you know, is something we have to interrogate, especially now that big data and architecture are just completely, you know, seamlessly dovetailed into each other.
Are they that dovetailed? I mean, one of the things I was thinking about while some of you were speaking, Mark, in fact, when you were talking, this occurred to me the first time when you were going through Corb and all his moments where he's talking about exactitude and the exact and precision, and thinking about his fascination with ships and airplanes and things. And then I started to think, well, we're putting this extraordinary reliance on big data. And look what happens. We get something like the Boeing 737 MAX, right? At which planes hardly crash anymore. So who thinks about it, right? But all of a sudden we make a new one and it doesn't work. Why that happened, we don't need to go into, but it makes one question, who's compiling the data? Who's running the tests? Who knows it's going to work? I mean, it also resonates with Eric's verified field, which would be a question I would also have for Sunil and for Ada. When I think about the tolerances of putting together the containers, not being perhaps all that different from the tolerances or intolerances, shall we say, that Eric was facing in his projects, or that Sunil finds when an earthquake shakes his cantilever. But it made me think about Paul Virilio on accident, and all the accidents waiting to happen. And Alicia, this relates to you too, because it made me think about Munari and working with the Xerox machine. So I don't think I heard you say anything about accident. I could have missed it, but did he know what he was producing, or were there a lot of happy accidents? So are there good accidents and are there bad accidents? I don't know, maybe Mark, you can talk about accident and data.
I'm feeling like an accident. It's actually amazing the way you put together all those things. And I was really, it started my head thinking, going back to the airplane. Of course, I think that architects are not very good at making buildings, and that a useful working definition of an architect is actually somebody who, the only person in society that doesn't know what a building is. Everybody else perfectly understands what a building is, but for an architect, the building is unbelievably mysterious and full of intrigue. So we are the ones for whom architecture is somewhat mysterious and confusing and destabilizing. So our relationship to buildings is sort of childlike and romantic and amazing for this reason. So I think in a certain way, this is probably pushing what you were saying, Cynthia, too close together, but it's like architects in a way live always on the edge of accident or in the dream of an accident. And even the architect is a kind of accident to, if architects didn't get involved in buildings, probably people would be warmer, it would be warmer and cheaper and all of those sorts of things. So I see the architect as a sort of philosophical creature who feels that their social contribution is to sort of stop buildings from being unnoticed, to as a sort of highlight, to make us aware of the building, something more like the role of an artist, let's say. And in that spirit, the architect is a kind of walking, talking disaster. It's always taking the things that work and almost encouraging them to an instability in the hope that something else would come out of it, including, just to finish, very, very precise, high-performing buildings. That is to say, there's the possibility that this, could we call it inexactitude of the architect, is actually a means for creating the possibility of new species of exactitude that are actually kind of parasitically taken advantage of by others. And those others could include certain architects. So again, you can think of colleagues in the world of architecture that really do think that architecture can provide shelter for more people for less. And maybe they draw on the thinking of architects who are irresponsible in every possible way. I say that feeling a bit irresponsible myself and hoping that there is some sort of way in which my behavior could be defended. I do this, I shame myself for the good of the field, something like that.
Okay, don't worry about that. Alicia, I'm going to come to you, but I want to go to Sunil first, because Sunil, you talked about your rather extraordinary relationship with Obayashi. And and I know something about design build in Japan through my partner's relationships in Japan and through my whole project being funded by Shimizu throughout the 90s. Do they save you from yourself sometimes? I mean, I'm thinking of you. I don't want to apply what Mark said to you, but and I mean, Alicia's right. The columns with the auto body paint, and that, I mean, you did make me laugh when you showed that photograph of the gentleman with the columns, and you said, well, he was short and stout, which was to make the columns look taller and more slender. That's how I read that. So
Reverse engineer in cases.
what is the relationship of an architect such as yourself with a company like Obayashi? Are they like the godfather, the father, the contractor? How much responsibility do they take away from you or give you? Where does the precision come in?
I think precision comes into crafting different types of psychological warfare relative to each other, so that they're, you know, how to, and I think especially developing over a 15-year relationship to very different types of entities, really beginning to learn about each other and understand each other's weak spots. So I think to your first question, yes, I think they would save us from ourselves. To answer your second question, I think sometimes that we might save them from themselves as well. So I think that, like, you know, there were these kind of two different time periods. One is that long stretch of time. And then the other, I think, getting back to, I think your earlier question about accident was that, I mean, one thing that I think probably every architect has experienced is just like the time frame it takes for something to get done, and the types of vulnerability that happens with time. And as, say, like the space from inception to manifestation begins to broaden, one opens oneself up to so many other types of vulnerabilities.
As an architect?
As an architect, yeah.
What kinds of vulnerabilities?
I would say exactitude, you know, like having this, how malleable one can be, or if sort of malleability is even a trait that we as architects, the way we dress, the way we look, the way we compose ourselves, is something, even vulnerability, I think, is something that is a very difficult thing for most architects to admit to. And both vulnerability and malleability really kind of run counter to the notion of exactitude. But I think faced with, you know, an expanse of time, expanse of relationships, that all these things in some ways begin to almost require an acknowledgement of it.
I want, Sunil, in response to what you just said about sort of time stretching out between conception and realization. I don't know if you know Marvin Trachtenberg's recent book called Building in Time, in which he's argued just the opposite, that in fact time has just essentially ceased to exist between conception and realization, that what you realize is exactly what you conceive, whereas in especially pre-Renaissance building, the way that you know, a Gothic structure was begun absolutely did not predict the way it would look at the other end. You know, time became a very powerful agent with this kind of collaborative and this process of accretion of different design visions. So I just wondered if, so the sense of time in all of this, can say anything about that?
Well, I would say that, I mean, sorry, I mean, you want Sunil to answer that question? Because I would deflect that sense of time question to Ada and Thomas, because,
out there, yeah.
Because they created this, Thomas, did you call it a cathedral-like space? I don't know, I got this.
Yeah, yeah, I did.
Cathedral, if we can go from your Gothic cathedrals, Michael, to to these stacked
stretch.
containers that achieve the same kind of space in a matter of what, 72 hours?
Yep, the first one was fast.
They
I
just,
want
needed a good, they just needed a good forklift in the 13th century.
They had some pretty high tech. Say.
No, I wanted to maybe reconnect to the accident first, because obviously accident is very central to our practice, because we start from something that we don't know every time we start a project. Meaning we know the object very well, but we don't know the actual object we're going to take. And the actual object we're going to take has its own life and its own dents and its own color and its own weathering, to also respond to Christopher's presentation, which was amazing. So accident for us is continuous, basically. It's something that we deal with all the time and we have learned to embrace. But what for me was very resonant also in the presentations that many of you did is that I guess prompted by exactitude, we all looked at what creates an opening in that starting from that exactitude, right? So, and that opening is precisely what challenges exactitude. And so from Chris talking about weather and as an uninvited guest, which is an expression that I really liked. I also feel very often I feel like an uninvited guest, so I particularly appreciate it. To Mark talking about the invisibility of architecture the moment you know, you look at those images of Waxman. So you know, you can push an idea so far where you know you enter another realm. Of course, Alicia, I am a huge fan of Bruno Munari. I told her personally on the chat. So the all work that she showed with the Xerox machine and the openness of misusing a piece of technology, which is what we do also, so it resonates with me. But also then opening that piece of technology to in a much more democratic world, to a much larger misuse. And of course, Sunil also with besides the idea of the misunderstanding as a productive territory, which is very interesting. Also this idea of the 20-year building lifespan, which is, it opens another opening, right? It's almost Sisyphus at work in something like that. And in the positive, looking at Eric and the underscores in the memorial, I thought that was a moment where that openness becomes design. I mean, it becomes, it goes in the productive, not just in something that is left open, but in something that is designed to be left open to then possibly be reoccupied. And I thought that was really, really powerful. So I was just curious if any of you wants to respond to that, because for me it was very interesting that in this idea of precision and something that seemed to want to control everything, we all looked at something that instead is uncontrollable as a productive moment. As something that also creatively could as a generative moment.
Ada, could I add on to that idea of controlling and uncontrolling and intentional and accidental? Because I was ruminating a little bit, you know, building that cathedral out by the, you know, it's the New Jersey waterfront, it's near the airport, it's sort of, it felt like a heist, it felt like a caper, it felt a little bit like our own conspiracy. And I was thinking about this dream of perfect control or controlled perfection. And then thinking, Cynthia, about the plane that falls from the sky or the presidential diagnosis that we don't know whether to believe. And I was thinking about conspiracy theory. And I think, or collective delusion, whichever you want to call it. And I think one of the appeals of conspiracy theory is it's an opportunity to be both incredibly accurate and incredibly untruthful. Because a conspiracy theory is so accurate within itself. It's precise, it's perfect, it's self-referential, it's whole. There are no accidents, right? There are no accidents. And it gives you this sensation of precision, predictability, controllability. If you just accept the fact that it's also very untruthful. You know, truth then becomes the realm of instability, the encouragement of instability, which I think Mark was suggesting that is perhaps part of the duty of the architect, or the religion of the architect, or the burden of the architect. And so, you know, the opportunity to be incredibly accurate and incredibly untrue is the appeal of that mode. And I wonder what the opposite of that would be, to be incredibly true and incredibly inaccurate. And I suspect that it has something of the quality of a happy accident, or the embrace of contingency.
I'm just going to come back in with the idea of accident in that context, I think, coming off of what Ada and Thomas are talking about. And I think that something resides in, I've been thinking about this since I was following the project about a year ago, Eric and Mijan in the Collier Monument. Like the moment when I think the piece is about this kind of void space in the center and this kind of notion of having the keystone locked in place. But I was really struck in the observation that there was something happening with the tool where the tool was wearing in relationship to the geologic. And I suppose I want to address, like Cynthia, like the idea of accident in Munari. It's not about just random. And I think I want to go back to Lau's comment to me right after I had spoken, which is there an introduction of ideas of chaos, or how do we learn from this? But I do think that there's something like the potential for that understanding to be controlled, not to have it out, but having a feedback loop. And there's this whole other way that people the technicians who service machines actually know the personality of those machines. They all know kind of where it might stick or what those problems are. So I found that Munari, or I find it very interesting, kind of thinking of interfaces, or thinking is like that kind of learning, you know, this kind of feedback system, strangely enough, that there is a kind of an assertion of a particular device that can be tweaked and understood, can work through randomization, but then begin to understand. So Munari was like, you know, I didn't show the whole catalog or all the work, but it's like very precise in terms of almost like a code, like the set of operations and understanding, and you know, there's a lot of play, but then what gets selected. So I think there's something in there that, you know, really struck me again about this idea of the diamond blade and the granite in some kind of, you know, like fight off. And it's also about the geometry of the blade vis-a-vis the curvature that you're trying to attain. And like all of those like really fine-tuned calibrations, I think are accidental. You can learn from those moments. So I'm not even sure in like the case I'm thinking about, but it's a wonderful challenge thinking through these questions today, you know, where exactly that is. What is that kind of, and it's not mastery. I think like Antoine, when you had spoken about you know, this idea of the human harnessing technology. When I was in a fellowship year with people in the humanities, everyone was like, what do you mean harnessing technology? Like that really stood out to them. This is something that I find I speak about freely, but this idea that there's more of an aliveness, or I don't know. I'm really just thinking about it quite a lot these days, but you know, feeling that I learned, you know, and hearing all the conversations over the last 2 days, kind of fertile ground to rethink some of those questions. And then of course, Cynthia's questions are always kind of going to come at us like a, you know, a boomerang or a dart, you know, something that can like a arrow that can come around trees to find us anyways. I'll end there.
Maybe I'll just talk about the diamond blade for a second, because when I read Francesca's book, like light bulbs went off, and I was like, I've lived this experience. You know, there's a skepticism of technology and a kind of fetishizing of precision. I think all architects are guilty of. So I think, you know, we're guilty. When the owner of the stone company told me, like, how do you know where the blade is? Like, I'm like, surely we know. We know that the blade is cutting the stone. but the stone is cutting the blade. I mean, that was like, wow, you know. And so the techniques to somehow manage that, you know, there's a kind of accident built into the kind of material. And Francesca talks about material as error, you know, and I think thinking with material, I think architects want to sort of understand that and use it or leverage it to a certain kind of advantage. I mean, I came back to this idea of verification because, you know, given the whole kind of world of untruth that we've somehow constructed, and there was a moment where I think it was cool to be skeptical. I think, you know, my friend Anna Miyake has a poster on her wall that says, "I want to believe," right? It's a UFO from what was that TV show? X-Files, right? I want to believe was cool, you know, 10 years ago. Now it's totally uncool to be a conspiracy theorist, right? So our whole idea of like questioning and being critical, now we want to be asserting of a certain truth. I was struck by Cynthia's idea that architecture is a kind of verifiable truth, or, you know, it's solid. We can come back to it. So I mean, I found the discussions today and yesterday so you know, all kinds of fireworks going off because there were so many resonances between so many of these papers. I think it's the credit to our organizers who put this group together that there was such a healthy sort of degree of overlap, seemingly accidental, but I know that that wasn't quite an accident. I mean,
Yeah, there are no accidents.
except of course the accident that Eric, all of your books ended up on quite accidentally by color on the shelves behind you.
it's an aesthetic project, even with an accident.
It's the best one I've seen, Eric.
I'm so glad that we came around to accident. It's made me realize that the reason I wanted to talk about the weather is that I wanted something accidental. I wanted something unpredictable. I've been very involved with dance and with Merce Cunningham's use of chants and random choreography within a highly exact scheme, and a different version, actually more different than people think, is John Cage's use of chants, accident. These things are not all the same. Chants, accident, hazard, just as exactitude, precision, accuracy are not, they're not all the same. But I would have thought that Calvino, who is very drawn to accident and chance, to dice and to cards and the tarot and so on, I would have thought that one of his memos would be about the accidental. His first memo is lightness. And, you know, we began this roundtable by talking about gravity and laughter. Lightness. The second of his memos is about quickness. And you think, yes, light. And then he gets to exactitude. Only when we've mastered lightness and quickness are we ready for exactitude. And I sort of feel, and now the accidental. And, you know, 24 hours ago, I thought he left the sixth memo unwritten. The sixth memo was going to be on consistency. And I thought, oh, too bad he didn't write that. He died before he could finish it. But now I think that there was something marvelously fitting about coming to the sixth memo, and now I'm going to write about something with real gravitas, consistency. And I think Calvino, in a kind of flip of the bird, said, you know, that's the essay that's going to remain unwritten. No consistency. We're going to stay with lightness, quickness, exactitude, and out.
That's a punchline, dying before you finish. That's a good joke.
Maybe can we zoom in a little bit on this accident thing? Because I don't know if any of us really agree by what we mean by accident. So I think I certainly don't have a kind of clear model, but what comes to my mind is, for example, the arrival of the kind of Darwinian paradigm, right? It's understood to be an argument about design. Darwin is saying, how can something look so perfectly designed and there be no designer? And the explanation is a system that's extraordinarily exact. That is to say, certain phenotypes will do better very precisely in relationship to certain environmental conditions. The requirement of evolution is mutation. But I don't think that mutation is exactly accident, nor do I know enough about Darwin's writing to say whether he would, as it were, give mutation a kind of force, as the kind of secret designer of a system. But it comes into my mind, for example, when Antoine is talking about the kind of desire to hand over the field of, or hand back the world of design to machines, because it seems to me when we say accident, I think we are still not quite agreeing with each other about in terms of my very romantic idea of the architect. I see the architect as being on the side of what might be mutation, that is to say, sort of acting as a kind of shuffling and rearranging and mutating potentials in the thought that some of those might become enormously practical in the hands of others and so on. And then the question becomes, in the digital environment, is creating the kind of conditions for something like mutation, what it is that our more digital colleagues are doing. And it's in the sense that I think of the truth thing, because if I understand it rightly, the sort of really the thing to be afraid of, I suppose, is that in the world of AI, neither the people that built the software nor the people that use it know what it is that the machine sees, nor does the machine know what it's seen until it sees it. So even the word data is a kind of visualization of this mysterious capacity to develop patterns. So increasingly, politicians and perhaps architects are going to be using systems that find patterns that were not possible to imagine before, nor are they necessarily visible when found. And even if so, they've been replaced by another pattern that is. So I think it's this kind of a deeper ecology, and then trying to understand where is the architect in that, and why I see Francesca's book as a kind of manifesto, because it kind of positions the field of architecture slightly to one side of truth. Like truth has the aura of that which precedes conversation. Again, using one of Antoine's words, it has that aura, but precisely if it did precede conversation, you wouldn't need the conversation. So actually the word truth signals a battle, a fight over what it is that is supposed to precede the conversation that's taking place. And in that sort of, let's say, battlefield, if you then position the architect there, then I think it would be post-truth according to the manifesto of Alejandro, but it would also be consistent with the manifesto of Francesca in the sense that one is, as it were, siding with error without yet quite knowing what it means to be in error. And it raises all sorts of very interesting questions about pedagogy, like do you, if your interest is to assist your students in being kind of mutants or mutating, to what extent do you have to give up your ability to control that discourse, even the one that I just give you now? And I'm a teacher, of course, so I should stop.
Still nervous about this truth business.
I want Antoine to answer this and Francesca to follow Antoine, if I can sort of play TikTok.
I'm always hesitating between the apocalyptic and the reassuring, because yes, we don't know how machines think, but I mentioned calculus. When calculus emerged, it took a century for people to just try to realize what calculus was doing. So we might one day, and this is why I introduced this conversation thing, because I do think that, the advantage of a conversation is that you don't always understand what's really going in the head of the person with whom you talk, but you build together something. So I think this is probably what we need to do with machines. But I wanted to come back to truth, because what makes me nervous sometimes is I'm not sure that actually it's the lack of truth the problem. It's rather an abundance of truth. Because I think the post-truth is more an abundance of people believing they have the truth. And I think we have forgotten good old, skepticism. We have abandoned, the spirit of rational criticism, etc. So it makes me nervous that we should defend, kind of there again, going back to Ruskin, the lamp of truth. I think if we defended already the lamp of, not knowing, for sure, that would be great. Because I think we're surrounded by so many people who know or believe they know, and they're the real danger. And perhaps the advantage of building is that actually they don't have to do with truth. They have to do with the fact that, you know, they are there, and they produce something, and we inhabit them, which is beyond truth. And
Can I
As an
ask
architect, I
something?
find it very difficult to
Is AI is AI the truth?
no, there is no, I think that, you know, I ended up saying we don't even know what it means to be human. And that's probably what it means to be human, is actually not to know what it means. To suspect always that we might be partly machines.
Yeah.
So AI is not the truth. The truth is to be disturbed by AI.
Yeah.
I don't think, and not to believe that this is the new engineering that is going to solve it all, nor to denounce it as, you know, there again, Armageddon, but to take it as an opportunity to realize that we don't know who we are.
Agreed. I mean, I think in a sense, AI, if in that sense, to be human is to exist in the maximally unknowable world, which is the world of material. You know, it's precisely, and AI is the maximally determined world. And the problem is the gap between the two. And I kind of want to come back to this question of accident, because presumably we can assume, given that the meaning of precision has changed in every era and changed radically between the 18th and 19th century, that then in parallel to that, the definition of accident necessarily has changed in every paradigm. And certainly in our paradigm, the paradigm of the AI, the paradigm of the kind of ascendancy of the maximally determined, the accident necessarily becomes the thing that isn't predicted, that which wasn't predicted, or that which can't be predicted. And perhaps those two things are different. Wasn't predicted and actually can't be predicted are also kind of different. And so it does start to change the relationship between the accident and chance. And you know, I'm really, it was incredible going back to the Ian Hacking and the idea of taming chance, and perhaps chance has escaped that it's taming in a new way right now. And chance has become, going back to C.S. Peirce, in a sense, the space of the truth. You know, he talks about chance as being the most obtrusive thing, the thing that flows in all the avenues of the senses. Well, surely that's the space of the truth. So for me, all these things are tangled up. And Thomas, I loved what you said, or Thomas, loved what you said about, hi, lovely to meet you, about the conspiracy theory as being this kind of space in which we can play with a kind of maximum precision, control everything. There's no accidents in it, you know. We can prove that we never landed on the moon in that way. And how
nothing is knowable, everything is provable.
Everything is provable. You know, in a sense, the conspiracy theory starts to become a bit like AI. You know, it becomes this maximally deterministic paradigm, which of course is not the whole story, which is why, in a way, it is not a threat, but the threat is the gap between it and the maximally unknowable realm, which is what we're in, which is what this, you know, the body is, puts us in.
I think what it revolves around more than accident is event. You know, what is an event? Is an event something that is computable? Because in some ways, the rise of the digital has been accompanied by a kind of reduction of everything to occurrences and events. But then what is a true event in the sense of Alain Badiou, you know, something that really creates a bifurcation? And this is probably where, you know, event have to do with politics by the end. You know, event have to do with, you know, the fact that human history takes a different direction.
Well, I think a satisfying conspiracy theory is very uneventful.
Yeah, that's systemic. I liked what was said, that, you know, what Francesca said, that, you know, in some ways it's like a simulation.
Yes, yes. The one we're all living in, apparently,
Yeah,
according to Elon Musk.
Yeah, we're all in the matrix. We all know that.
I mean, this is a way to get back to Conrad Waxman, because for Waxman and others, the future is precisely that which you cannot predict. Right? So it's something like the definition of accident, or let's say an extreme case of the event. And I'm a bit obsessed about it because I just finished this book on Waxman, so I apologize, but I'm intrigued by his argument, which he says the future is everything, and everything that the designer should think of, but precisely since the future is that which exceeds what you could imagine, you have to imagine anyway, knowing that what you imagine will not be what happens, but doing it anyway in the name of what might not happen. And then he tries to imagine a hospitality that architecture could offer to the future. That is to say, a kind of, in this sense, of course, directly inspirational to Cedric Price and the others. How could you construct a kind of scaffolding for the unknown, a scaffolding that wouldn't dictate to the unknown, a scaffolding that would finally undo itself, and hence the need to be an expert in joints, because in fact why you need to be, and this is totally anti-Kenneth Frampton, if you could say, but be careful, because Waxman asked Kenneth to be his historian, and Kenneth agreed for a TV show, because finally architecture, when it dissolved, would become pure television. So in the end, the exit for architecture designed by Waxman was television, and Kenneth was meant to be the quote-unquote historian for the show. But it is an interesting, in my mind, fascinating, seductively fascinating, that you would go to what we conceive of as the heart of architecture, let's say the joint, and even the heart of the joint, as I think shown so amazingly in the section through joints that Alejandro showed. And according to Waxman, at the center of every joint is an emptiness, which is sort of wrapped by the joint. And so finally, the perfect joint gives way to that emptiness, and architecture, as it were, disappears without any understanding of what happens next. Like, in other words, it's a form of hospitality to the future, which means it must be unbelievably exact in order to, as it were, commit suicide. So kind of a kamikaze architecture. Anyway, this was sort of an advertisement for an attitude. But it's funny that it turns out, I know, for example, Alicia is also an expert on Waxman. So there's a lot of Waxmania in this panel. This is a symptom of something.
Yeah, and I keep thinking of the tooled factory in Burbank, where he plans fastidiously, first with Gropius, to kind of produce the packaged house, and obsesses so many of the details, Mark, you showed yesterday, and that we also see kind of in his book, The Turning Point of Architecture. And I always think of that factory that he had designed every single machine and tooled that out, and then ultimately missed the call for the US government to produce the housing in wartime use. So the whole thing gets dismantled without it ever being, with the packaged house being executed, and like that to me represents something about, like, I love how you've talked about like this kind of, you go further and further into the joint and then it's not there. So I'm like wondering, just it's quite amazing. And then this kind of dissolution of space. And then I followed Waxman in some ways because of his incredible influence in Italian architecture during the 60s.
Right. Because he was there, right?
Yeah, he was in Genoa. Yeah.
Yes. I would like to ask a question to Cynthia, and I know I can do it because she said yes in the chat.
You predicted the future.
Well, I asked God. I'm just trying to understand where we're going here, and I'm beginning to suspect, or actually, I've been suspecting for a few minutes, that we are being designed and architected by Cynthia. Because, sorry, I'm very slow in processing things. because I'm still thinking what makes me laugh. And now I'm going to make the Italians here laugh. And it's Massimo Troisi. And if you're Italian.
I'm from Napoli, so.
There you go. and it's, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but what does he do? He does the typical thing of showing his weakness, his vulnerability, but of course he shows the vulnerability of everybody else, and you immediately feel guilty. So it's the jester, but it's a very sophisticated and then also political jester, a very quiet one. So I'm not telling Cynthia that she's the jester, but you started by asking us what truth is in architecture, and nobody replied. Nobody wanted to answer first. Okay, maybe we're tired. So then you went into laughter, and laughter, of course, does that. It exposes the the nakedness of the emperor. So of course it's not a funny laughter. It's one of the painful ones. Comes from the stomach, from the belly. And now we're talking about accident. Having tried to understand the issue of AI, and there I would argue that AI doesn't get the joke, gets the joke wrong, but we also do. And so again, it's a non-answer. So we've gone from truth unanswered to truth maybe to laughter, and now we're talking to accident, and we're going back to us laughing in a not funny way, asking ourselves what it is that we can do, that we are going to do. And I'm thinking, oh no, we are the accident. We are the accident. We are the accident. So, but this is me trying to listen to all these micro videos I have on my screen. And where are you taking us, Cynthia?
I'm not taking you anywhere, but let's remember that when you're driving on the highway, everybody slows down to look at the accident. Maybe everybody slows down here. I mean, is this group an accident? No, I don't think so. I think that Harry and Michael and Laura put together this group very purposefully to see what happened. You talked about laughter. Antoine talked about the need for conversation. Here we are from points all over the globe, different times of day and night and different weather systems. And we're talking to each other, and there are still a few stragglers, I think, that are actually listening to us on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in Amherst and South Hadley. So is this a circus? You want me to raise another metaphor? I thought about how many ring circus could this be? But I can only respond to what you all said in the role that I hold generally in architecture, which is to respond to what all of you produce by providing a platform for the future, not a Conrad Waxman platform, not the hospitality perhaps that he was talking about, but perhaps something similar to that, by producing a small, modest magazine that provides a continuing conversation about issues that are important to certain people in architecture, not to all people. But if I look at this window here, this window in front of my bright window, we are the people who talk to each other. And so how do we talk to the broader audience? What are the touchstones that would be important to them? I think perhaps accidents are one of those things. Laughter is perhaps one of those things. I mean, I associate laughter with joy, and I forget who was talking today, but a friend sent me a meme about the Trump family's coronavirus diagnosis, and it made me laugh out loud. And not very much does these days, but I'm not a big meme person. And we're not going to get into this thing about images that I'm always battling with. But if we could just end, I mean, Parry, you have to send me a signal, like, you know, like the referee or the coach or something. We have to stop at some point, or, you know, Francesca, if you want to go back to bed, or if Alejandro, you want to go to bed, you have to let me know. But when Mark, when you talked about the future and Alejandro's project that plays off of Voxman, when he said yesterday they still don't know what the building looks like, but also what I liked, Antoine, about what you said was that you were looking toward the future in order to try to, I mean, you said something like that yesterday. I'm trying to find in my notes where I wrote that down, and it might have been in the Q&A. You're trying to imagine the future in order to deal, or are you trying to imagine the future in order to deal with the present, a future that may never exist? I mean, it's kind of like you following on the Voxman idea that Mark just proposed, that you see a future, but you don't know if it will exist. I mean, when you're talking about AI in the future, how much do we know about it? What kind of, what is that future? And we certainly don't know anything precise or exact about it. And when you say that that you cited Pierre Naville, I think, I don't know if I wrote that down correctly.
You did.
Social automatism.
Mm-hmm.
And the automatism refers to an archetype. And you suggested that design, that human design is to rival nature. I became quite alarmed, if we're going to come back to nature now, if I can introduce another subject. If AI designs based on what it's learned from what man has done, will it continue to rival nature? Or are we going to program it to be in concert with nature? I mean, there's so many questions raised by this panel for me today. I could do another 2 years worth of logs on everything that's just been discussed here. But I don't know. Francesca, do you have a thought on that? I saw you write something down.
I wrote down, I don't know whether you've all read Overstory, Richard Powers, precisely about AI and nature. You know, incredible. Yes. So in a sense, for me, that's the best answer to the AI nature question now. Yeah. I actually wanted to, I mean, this might really annoy you, so you can redirect it. The accident and the joke. I mean, firstly, we're not the accident, we're the joke. Then maybe the joke is the accident. Slapstick is all about the accident that's the joke, but it's not really an accident. I mean, you know, there's a kind of...
What did you say? Did you say plastic?
Slapstick.
Slapstick.
It's about the accident that's the joke, but the accident was never really an accident.
Oh, you're right.
Well, I think Antoine was mentioning Buster Keaton and the meticulous planning of those apparent accidents, the kinetic ingenuity of getting, you know, the facade to fall on you at just the right time.
Absolutely. Actually, you know, burlesque is intimately linked to the rise of scientific management. It's based exactly on the same calculation of movement, etc. So, you know, Buster Keaton is putting the same energy as, you know, a disciple of Frederick Taylor to actually control his body, because what is admirable is that, you know, Buster Keaton, it looks uncontrollable and everything is in control. At least he's totally in control of his body, who could be by the end a definition of the artist, creating a fake accident through total control.
Well, it's Charlie Chaplin, modern times, that, you know.
Absolutely, same school, same school, absolutely.
In the Three Stooges. Okay, this is evolving and could become just a sort of aggregation without any sense. I would like to ask if there are any of you who have a final statement or question that you want to leave the audience with, because I have been given a signal that we should wrap this up in like 2 or 3 minutes. no, 5 minutes. I see my watch doesn't accord with my phone. The other thing that I think about when I think about accidents is that the etiquette of a Zoom meeting is you can't be late. And because we all have the exact same clock on our computers, there's no ability to say, well, my antique Rolex is running late, so it's actually running fast. So I'm going to always be early, or I'm always going to be late. We no longer have an excuse. We're all on the same timer everywhere. Any comments? Space and time.
It's kind of a footnote, Cynthia, but I was thinking about exactly that we all have the same clock on our computers, and that there is some relationship between measurement, which is one construction of accuracy, and collective consensus reality, which is one construction of truth. And there's something perhaps lovely about the idea of measurement as a collective endeavor. That a meter here is a meter where you are, is a meter in not just in a safe in France, but a meter is everywhere. And there's a poignant, picturesque loss of localized systems of measurement. But the active measurement as a collective consciousness or a collective endeavor, I think maybe unites a discourse of accuracy and a discourse of truth. And that's kind of half a thought, but there is something there, building on Eric's idea of verification on site, and every site is everywhere because it's measured, that maybe starts to square some of these circles, at least in terms of architectural practice.
That's what was so nice about Sunil's presentation, when he kept having these mathematical, I mean, the 360 yen pegged to the dollar. I forget when you were making that place for the shoes, and all the measurements, and it's a really, really great presentation, keeping us right on track. All those measurements, it is a universal measure, except for the United States rejection of metric system.
Yeah. I wanted to thank Perry and the organizers. It was really, I appreciate very much being asked to think about exactitude, and I mean, I think there's this huge need for stupidity reduction in architecture, and it occurs to me after talking with you all this afternoon that exactitude could also be thought about as like going to the doctor. Like, in a way, every aspect of architectural education, production, discussion could actually go to some sort of clinic and have to kind of confess its relationship to exactitude, or undergo some sort of exactitude evaluation. And I think something interesting might come out of the other end of that. Like if you take any school and say, okay, I just want to root out any kind of lingering concepts of exactitude and see how they operate. I just think that is a sort of a therapeutic gesture, might have interesting consequences. I think much less interesting would be the thought that or interesting for me, would be we think a lot about exactitude and we become kings and queens of exactitude as a subject and go out and, as it were, conquer the world with these new concepts. I think rather more interesting would be a kind of, kind of just sort of getting rid of some stupid ideas to move forward. And exactitude itself is likely to be the stupidest of them all. And so maybe the extreme version of this is that when you come out of the clinic, you just don't use that so often. And so my compliment to the organizers would be that I will try to no longer refer to exactitude in the future. I'm willing to sign some sort of document.
Okay, Perry, can I hand this? Or Thomas, did you want to say something? No, you're waving.
I'm waving my pen so I can sign.
Okay. Perry, can I hand this back to you?
Thank you so much, Cynthia. That was wonderful. And I will now move this back to the speaker view. And what I would really like to do is just to say a few words on behalf of everyone. And I've promised my co-organizers that we will keep this very, very quick, because we know that you're all very tired, no matter which time zone you are in. So I really like to thank all of you, each and every one of you, who have shared with us a more complex, nuanced, and multifaceted series of explorations on the theme of exactitude, even if this is the one and only time, and from now on, you will go on and never use the term. And you've done it generously, and knowing that we are all limited these days by so many things that surround us.